Hello, I'm Pam Hoffman, Everyday Spacer.
And I'm Jeff Miller, 2049 Outfitters.
At Everyday Spacer, we show regular folks how to personally and directly participate in space exploration, science, and astronomy. We are here on Friday nights at 9 p.m. Pacific time, 12 midnight Eastern time, and 3 p.m. Saturday, Queensland, Australia. We are broadcasting live from Thousand Oaks, California. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, today's guest is author David Dickinson, pre-taped on May 7th. And we'll be back in 6.8 seconds.
Okay, so we split up our taped session because StreamYard has a limit of 10 minutes per video. We can run what they call in the industry B-roll, but on StreamYard, that's this platform, they say 10-minute limit. So what I have first up for you is an introductory type of segment. And you'll notice there is a very minor glitch that appears during the recording. I froze a few times during the taping, but nothing that impacts our conversation. Dave was talking, I was still, but it looks like I'm really still during that. So let me go ahead.
And this is David Dickinson.
David Dickinson, right. I will go ahead and run our first video. Like I say, it's sort of an introduction. Be right back. Hello, we are taping this conversation on May 7th because Dave is in Norfolk, Virginia, and it's very late there during our live show. Hi, Dave. Thanks so much for joining us. We know each other through the weekly space hangout, although I heard about your books before that.
Thanks, Pam. Yes, it's I've been doing the weekly space hangout. We were talking earlier from way back when it was actually on Google Plus. Google Plus was something that was before there was Zoom. There was Google Plus, and that's why we still call them the weekly space hangout. So.
I love it, though. The weekly space hangout is so friendly.
Yeah.
All right. So Dave is a writer and a longtime sky watcher. He's written several sky guides and articles for Universe Today, Sky and Telescope. That is so cool. And Astro Gear Today. And I remember you talked about some binoculars you had.
Yeah, I had a set of giant binoculars for Astro Gear Today from Explore Scientific. Those were, they wanted them back, of course. All the big expensive stuff they always want back. So I had some go-to scopes last year from Stellina and Vionis that were. I nearly bought the one from Unistellar that was smartphone controlled. I thought really hard about buying it, but it's
what a testimonial! Wow.
Yeah, it was a nice toy.
All right. So you even write science fiction, and I've heard there's poetry in there somewhere.
I am actually, it's one of my coolest bylines is that I'm actually a published sci-fi poet, which is what I always like to lead with. So I've done, it's for Starline magazine, which is actually and I would advise any writer, if you want to try to get into, poetry is a much lower bar. Not that it's, poetry writing is hard too, than science fiction. Poetry magazines are always looking for content out there. So if you want to just get yourself on the radar and stuff, I would advise starting off with some sci-fi poetry before you go into full fiction.
So there are publications that are just all poetry.
This started because I wrote an article in my blog way back about science fiction poetry. And then I started digging around. I'm like, oh, there are actually magazines out there. So I started pitching them back and forth. And it's like, to my surprise, it's a genre. There's sci-fi coup. There's like haikus that are science fiction. It's a whole genre that's like, I had no idea till about a decade ago.
You said sci-fi coup, right?
Like haiku, only
right.
Science fiction haikus. Yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
I had no idea these genres, these subgenres even existed. So.
No, I had no idea until just the second I did either. And you are not a professional astronomer. No. However, you do teach, and you said science, but tell me a little bit more about teaching science. Is that like a college thing? Kids,
My degrees are, I have 2 degrees. I have an associate's in aircraft armament systems technology through the Community College of the Air Force, because I was in the Air Force enlisted for 20 and a half years. And I am a bachelor's in earth science teaching for high school teaching. So I've done that for a time in Florida. But I started moving toward freelance writing, and I just enjoy the set your own schedule, work online. And with what's gone on the last year, actually, it's me and the wife both work online and write online, and we were impacted very minimally by doing this. So it enables us to travel, and we've been to Spain, we've been to Morocco. We keep, if there's Wi-Fi, we keep writing, and we keep doing what we're doing, and it doesn't really impact our schedule. So I moved toward freelance writing about a decade ago, and I've just stayed in that field. I would say I'm a very avid, longtime amateur astronomer and space enthusiast, pundit / space nerd, basically.
Oh, that's awesome. And we were chit-chatting before. You said you've been writing science fiction like since you were a kid.
Yes, like I said, I wrote prequels to Star Wars before there was Star Wars. I did fanfic as a kid because I just wanted more content out there to consume back in the 70s and 80s. So I wrote stories. Like I said, Stephen King says you first imitate, then you create. So I started imitating, writing fanfic, and then kind of moved off into writing my own thing off and on over the years. So my Amazon page, in addition to having these 2 nonfiction books, this is the one from last year, there is also many, I like doing short stories. You know, you can crank them out in a day or 2. You get a wild idea in your head, these one big idea kind of stories. So there's a whole bunch of sci-fi short stories up there on my page as well.
That is awesome. And your mission. So that is the first segment of our conversation. And you may notice some overlap. We just really kept talking. I think in the future I'm going to have to build in some breaks. But you know, sometimes I just had to cut it down for StreamYard, the StreamYard limit of 10 minutes. All right. So
And hi, Cliff.
Yeah, hi, Cliff. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate that. So in this next part, Dave talks about his mission and a couple of other things. So let's hear that next. And your mission, tell us in your words.
Just to get eyes on the sky worldwide. I'm most active on Twitter, and that's usually I'm at AstroGuys with a Z. There, it's in my tagline. And I'm mostly trying to get, you know, there's a good worldwide community out there, people, because if there's an astronomical event, an occultation or an eclipse, sometimes it's happening in Australia or Malaysia, or it might be happening here in Virginia, or there's a satellite pass, or right now, the big thing this weekend is we have a Long March rocket booster that's coming in. That's a 22-ton booster that's coming in uncontrolled. So everybody's tracking this, but it might come down in some remote area of, you know, Mongolia or South America or something like that. And what I really love with Twitter and social media, we'll probably see everybody has a smartphone out there now. So even somebody outside of their yurt in Central Asia might get the video of this thing re-entering. So that's what I kind of gear what I'm doing toward, is just getting eyes on the sky worldwide out there and trying to, you know, create a international community of amateur astronomers.
Well, you know that, and just I'm wondering, when is that supposed to re-enter?
Right now, the timing I've been seeing on Space Track is Sunday morning. Right around 3 UT Universal Time. Now, where it's going to land, I think the window is still plus or minus 11 hours. And this is taking 92 minutes to go around the Earth. So plus or minus 11 hours means the window is still very wide, as far as we won't know a wide window until probably tomorrow night. And the inclination for the orbit, how it's tilted to the Earth's equator, is 41.5 degrees. That means that it can come down anywhere from 41.5 degrees north latitude, which is about the same latitude as Chicago, New York City, Southern Oregon, all the way down to 42 degrees south latitude, which is all of Africa, all of Australia, most of South America. So that's a really wide swath north to south where this is.
Anywhere in that
big band, yeah, from north to south. So right now, this is kind of like if you're old enough to remember Skylab back in '79, there was a big fuss about the Skylab came in uncontrolled, and there was almost a big media frenzy around. You know, there were Vegas odds on where it was going to come down in the world. So I was probably, say, 11 years old at the time, but I remember the whole panic about people wearing hard hats and people like I said, taking bets on where Skylab would re-enter. So it's interesting that this is quite a big re-entry. Everybody was surprised China did this too, because they're a signatory to say that we're not going to do these kind of on international treaties, these kind of re-entries. So but it's interesting. I've seen this booster actually on a past Sunday morning because you can see the Tiahe station. That China's modular space station. The first module is up there, so you can see that, and then you can see the booster coming behind it, flaring and flashing as it tumbles.
Oh, interesting. We haven't looked for that one. Of course, we see space station an awful lot. And Wednesday night for us, and we're in Southern California, fairly close to Los Angeles, we actually caught a couple of those strings of Starlink.
Yep. Yeah, I've seen those. Yeah, if the Chinese space station, it's up on Heavens Above for tracking now. So if you have your location in there and you go in their main page, it will give you predictions. But we're going to be seeing more of it because they're assembling it in coming years. But the booster is up in that same orbit, and it's interesting because as it tumbles end over end, what you see is a flashing star. This is the booster up in the sunlight overhead that's flashing. But it's kind of interesting to see that, and it'll be interesting to see where it comes down.
Well, and there's actually a launch out of Wallops tomorrow night.
Yes.
Like around 8. And is that something, at that time, are you going to be able to see like the rocket?
Yes, from here in Norfolk, I've seen Wallops launches. They're going right at sunset, so it should be visible. I'm an urban astronomer right now. We're in downtown Norfolk, but the good thing about my location, and it's something I always try to impress on people too, wherever you are, no matter how light polluted, I've done star parties from downtown St. Pete where we could only see Jupiter and the moon, and I've still pulled off a successful night showing people Jupiter and the moon. I've observed from the Las Vegas Strip where you could barely see like the three stars in the belt of Orion, So here in Norfolk, it's very light polluted, but what I do, we have a parking garage that is open on the very top level, and nobody parks up there, and it's a nice big flat platform up over the city. Now, you have light pollution from the nearby lights and everything, but I just take all my gear, this telescope, put it in a cart, haul it in the elevator up to the roof, and set up. So that's where I'm watching these satellite passes. And I can see Wallops launches. We can see launches from the Kennedy Space Center in the Cape here in Virginia if the launch geometry is correct. Yes, wow. we saw a Starlink launch, look like a big, brilliant comet come up here. And the reason was that it was right at pre-dawn. So the sunlight is coming up over the curve of the Earth. We kind of knew, I had a suspicion, so I'm shooting out on Twitter. It's like, if you're on the East Coast, you might want to get up early for this one Sunday because I think it's going to be a good show. The best ones, they always have to launch, of course, out over the water because from Florida, out over the Atlantic for safety reasons. So they want, if anything comes down, they would want it not to come down in somebody's backyard, but out in the ocean. So these Starlinks, like the old shuttle launches in the International Space Station chasing launches, come right up the East Coast. And if the sun is shining right up over that, it hits the plume as the rocket comes up. So it looks very dramatic when it comes up. I think, let's see here if I can dig it out.
My first rocket contrail I actually saw from Chino Valley, Arizona. It was launched out of Vandenberg Air Force Base. And I was blown away how far away I was. And my first reaction was, what in the heck is that? I'd never seen one before. And I never was, because I'm originally from Ohio. So, that is beautiful.
I'll do the old school screen share and just show it. But that was the Starlink launch. Yeah, that was one of the more dramatic ones we've seen. We saw when Boeing did the Starliner a few years ago, that came up, had that same pre-dawn launch geometry. Now on the West Coast from Vandenberg, it's at dusk because they're launching the opposite direction out over they do a lot of polar launches. They're launching out. So the very best ones that you're going to see is if they launch right at dusk.
Oh, because my first one, it was like sunrise, right? Like I'm getting up ready to go to work.
That can happen too, even in that direction too. There's videos of Starlink launch a few years ago that people out on the highway, I mean, there was cars crashing into each other because they were like, look at the launch. It was a Starlink launch, a Falcon 9 SpaceX launch out of Vandenberg. And so many people on the highway, if you don't follow this stuff, they have no idea. I heard dog walkers that morning when that Starlink launch went off that were looking like it looks like an ICBM launch or something. So they're like, oh my God, what is that? So they had no clue it was going off. So in Florida, I lived there too. It was a more common thing to see these sorts of, but launches are fun to track. Satellites are fun. There's a whole community of people out there I've discovered that are tracking spy satellites and classified satellites and trying to see where these things are in orbit. So it's really, I kind of have the ideas for another book brewing about the history and like what to see for satellite tracking in the sky, because there's not really a guide. I have a chapter in this book on satellite tracking, but I would kind of like to expand that into a book if somebody will publish it.
That's a really good place to show your link. So if you want to know more about Dave and his books, go to amazon.com/author/David Dickinson.
Wow.
So thanks for joining us. We got some new people and new comments. Really appreciate that. But you will notice, and then just so you know, this is taped live. We're live here now, and we taped a conversation together. David and I did earlier this month, May 7th. So you'll notice that some of this is what we called at Boeing OBE, Overcome by Events, because it was taped earlier this month. And so, just be aware that was taped earlier this month, and it has, been overcome.
Right. Yeah. And the Long March rocket coming down that they were talking about actually did come down over them near the Maldives. So.
Right. In the Indian Ocean. Right.
Yeah. So.
All right. So in this next segment, we start talking about Dave's books and the things he wrote about, maps, apps, and more.
Yeah. Hi, JL. I don't know who you are, JL, because it just says JL. So welcome.
Thanks so much for tuning in. All right. So the next segment, we'll start right now. See you on the flip side.
Yeah, the first one I wrote with Fraser Cain at Universe Today. Pamela Gay did the foreword. Universe Today: Ultimate Guide to Observing the Cosmos, and that was everything in my brain in astronomy in a book, basically, because I kind of had the mindset, and I always say if you write one book, for whatever reason, you may never write another book. So it's like I tried to dump in there. It was kind of a tall order, everything from comet watching to solar system observing to deep sky observing to astrophotography to meteor showers, aurora, satellite tracking. And we start with, of course, how you find your directions in the sky, what's right ascension, declination, what's altitude and azimuth, the different coordinate systems, a little bit of history of astronomy. It was a tall order to squeeze that into 12 chapters.
Wow.
And all that. And astronomy is changing too. There's already things out there. Like we talk about a lot of space news, like things like when you talk about the Hubble constant in expansion, kind of like, well, the value I quoted in there a couple of years ago may be changing. We're finding out very slightly. So, things like the Hipparchus missions or Gaia, they're finding out different things with Cepheid variables and those kinds. So a lot of those distances are going to be revised. You might remember way back in the day, this was the inspiration for the second book, Burnham's Celestial Handbook. Still on my desktop, 3 volumes. This was written back in the 60s. This is old enough that it has 1950 coordinates in it. It has 1950.0 coordinates in it. But this was a classic pre-internet, and it's still one I keep around because it's something it hasn't been digitized or really put on the internet properly. Oh. But that was kind of my inspiration to do something like a deep sky. One thing Burnham's doesn't have is a lot of star charts. It was done to be companion with something that's more graphic. So I did this one, kind of get it centered here, to kind of have something like that you would actually use in the field. So you would have, and again, it was a lot of information to pack in the book because we had to do the entire sky north to south, but I wanted the kind of star charts and then all the best objects in the charts laid down, something you could lay down on a table, have a red flashlight, and kind of use to star hop and find things. So, and I had to learn how to map edit and do everything in Adobe Illustrator. Wow. Because I'm asking, the publisher, it's like, well, how do you want these? Like they said, well, Adobe Illustrator. I said, well, I'll play with it this weekend and see if I can do what I think I need it to do. And it's like, so I had to teach myself all that. It's kind of interesting. But maps are difficult. Yeah, you're like, wow, you never really think it's just a graphic. But
I have a little tiny bit of experience with it. I get it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it's, I use Stellarium, of course, as a good freeware planetarium program. I'm always pushing Starry Night, which isn't free, but that's kind of useful out there too. There's a lot of other planetarium programs out there. But those are Stellarium is a wonderful resource because it's free and it works pretty well. I'm using that a lot of times just for getting these kind of underlying templates that I build my maps onto. It's an interesting process as far as breaking down. I didn't want to break down just by constellation, which a lot of guidebooks do. And this was a little more experimental. I took the hemisphere of the sky and broke it down into 20 sections. So you literally have the polar region, then you have the central declination, then you have the equatorial declinations, then you go down through the southern hemisphere. Because otherwise constellations, some constellations like say Ursa Major have a lot of objects. Virgo has a lot of objects to talk about. Some of the teeny ones like Telescopium or Indus have almost nothing to talk about. So it kind of gives like more weight to like smaller versus large. It's like with states and political like convention and stuff like that. So I kind of wanted to just break down the sky as it was with the celestial sphere to kind of, and I limited it to best objects down to 10th magnitude. I had anytime, and you know this, you publish a book, there's what you want to do, and there's what the publisher says we have a page limit that we need to hit. So I had to really do some tough choices to get it under 200 pages. Yeah, exactly.
This one's 30 pages, and it's all very formulaic, and you have to fill it in. Like they give you a template and everything, but it's great. I mean, it's a wonderful way to do a book.
That would be a challenge. I don't know if I could do an astronomy book in 30 pages. So it's 200. I thought it's like, wow, I'm really having to. I'm always afraid we're editing enough that it's like, again, and there was a battle between. I want the maps to be. They were. Here's what I was using for my printed homemade reference while I was writing it, and it's like, I want the maps to be like this. And then we had it's like, well, we're going to have the maps half page because I was like, wow, it's like, if they're too tiny, everybody's going to be like, I can't read the maps. But it's always a battle between what you want and what ends up on the page. So
were you able to actually put in the page, if you would like more information, come to my website and you can blow it up and you can deep dive into it. I mean, that would be a great way to.
I still have an idea to do a Kickstarter companion that has nothing but these maps in it. Like that would be something I would just self-fund to publish. So, because I have all the templates still and all the, if there was ever an interest out there that enough observers said that they wanted it, I thought about maybe Kickstartering something like that. So it's.
So the first book sounds like it's very kind of general, but somewhat evergreen, and anybody could pick it up for a long time and really just start learning. And then the other one is sort of more deep dive. And are you thinking maybe in the future do something really, really, way deep, or I don't know.
Well, I think of doing this one. I did the constellations and deep sky observing in the first book. We covered it in chapters 4 and 5. So this is really chapters 4 and 5 in one book, a little more expanded. Now that I'm doing books rather than just I'm doing one book. And
so thanks so much for the people that are just commenting and coming in. And I think we have a new one. In fact, Roger, I'm not sure. Okay. Okay, you're gonna have to tell me what that's about. I'm not totally sure. So anyway, just so you know, I taped a show with Dave Dickinson last May the 7th, and we had to break it up because StreamYard requires a limit of 10 minutes. And so in this next segment, just so you understand what's going on, we started to talk about satellite observing and getting photos of the space station, the Chinese space station, against the moon, the sun, and some other things. Yeah, you had a comment?
Yeah, just going back on Cliff, when you were talking about the big booster launch.
That's
interesting
fascinating.
that you guys saw it. It must have just still been in the atmosphere when it came over the corner on the Earth down past the equator. I would imagine you guys wouldn't have seen those. I remember a really good one. We were actually at a star party. A whole bunch of us with telescopes up in Oak Park, somewhere near here. And everything stopped to watch it. It was
it took a minute. I was like, what is that thing? Because it was just and then it got kind of bigger and bigger, and they're launching out of
Yeah.
So
Well, at first we were wondering, was that a meteorite? Boil load.
yeah, right.
Then we noticed that it was heading up, not down. We figured, yeah, okay, it's a launch.
Yeah, and I think they figured out it was something military that night. Anyway, so if we have any other questions, please let us know. Yeah, Roger.
Okay.
Oh, sorry about that. All right. Well, and you can catch the replay. No problem. All right. So I'm going to go ahead into this next segment. Like I said, it's satellite observing, and well, you'll hear more. See you on the flip side.
And just I'm doing one book and maybe never doing another book. Those separate chapters, that's what I'm thinking. Like I was saying before, satellite observing. There's not really a good amateur guide just to satellite observing, and it's a fascinating field. It seems like more and more that's what I'm getting drawn back toward, like with Starlinks and with the new space stations going up. And these are all things that there's a lot with satellite observing. Things are changing all the time. So it's really a fascinating topic to get into. And doing that, I would be able to use all NASA photos. So that makes graphics a whole lot easier to do.
Wonderful pictures of people take of like the space station against the sun and stuff. It's like,
yes.
Holy mackerel, how do you do that?
I've done that before. There used to be a site called CalSky that was Calculated Sky. Unfortunately, they folded last year, but they would give you, if you had your latitude, longitude loaded in there, they would give you predictions for when the ISS would transit either the moon or the sun. So you just had to do a little bit of planning to either go to these exact locations on Google Maps. Now, it's very quick when you see it happen because I have caught a couple of these, and it's like maybe less than a second long. You can see it visually because when you're watching through a solar filter, if it's going in front of the sun, you just see a little, looks like a bug or something passing in front of the sun. But the moon is a little easier because sometimes if the space station is lit, if you catch it when it's illuminated, you can see it come up. But if it's a shadow pass, you don't see it until it transits. Now there's a site called, I think it's ISS Transit Finder. There is an app that will give you the same prediction out there. So it's unfortunate CalSky, like I said, they just he stopped hosting the site. The guy, that was a free site, but it's not up there. But I'm pretty sure it's ISS Transit Finder that will, you load it onto your smartphone and it knows from your GPS where you are, and it will send you an alert like, hey, tonight there's a transit of the ISS in front of the moon, and you just have to be set. The best thing to do is set a DSLR on a tripod with a pretty decent zoom. That will give you a full frame moon image, and probably run video, pretty high speed video, like, several thousand frames a second or something like that. And you can just aim it at the moon and wait. You're kind of waiting just to ambush the station as it passes in front. And now we have the Chinese station that's going to be getting larger. So somebody's going to probably catch it transiting the moon. It's only a matter of time.
One of the questions I had before we got away from it, what are the Chinese planning for their space station? Will it be comparable to the international?
It's much smaller. This is three main modules. The core module just went up a week ago.
Okay.
But it's going to be big enough that it's already, you can see it naked eye. So, and it's going to be big enough that really dedicated amateurs that are aiming large 14-inch telescopes and guiding, they'll be able to. I already saw an image somebody did on Space Weather where they've gotten detail of that core module. So 3 modules, and then there's going to be the little cargo modules and the crews that they're going to rotate out. So it's going to be up there for about a decade. So it's going to be comparable to Mir, the Russian Mir station they had back in the 90s. So
that helps.
And the ISS has probably got another decade in it. It's weird to think, but we'll probably be writing the ISS. Now they'll bring that down over the South Pacific because it's so big. They're going to have to just put it in somewhere where it's unpopulated. So that will have a controlled reentry. But sad to say that I would give the ISS, from what I've been hearing, maybe another decade. The Russians have already talked about pulling out. There's been some problems. It's aging. They've had problems with black mold on the station like you would in a house because, as things get older, the black mold, if it gets endemic, they spray and clean and sanitize everything in the station. But they say there is a gym locker room funk to the International Space Station when you first go into it. So people have been living there nonstop for over 20 years. So
Right. Yeah, and it makes sense. So let's get back a little bit to something. And I've never been able to really do this. I've tried a few things, but it's not as successful as I would like. Talk to me about astrophotography. And do you have like books? Are you going to write a book? Tell me a little bit more about.
Chapter 9 in the first book has a chapter, and it's probably the one that is already the most outdated already. I dabble in astrophotography. I like to say I know a lot of really amazing astrophotographers, but I'm a lazy kind of naked eye astronomer myself. But I know the techniques. Yeah. I've done planetary imaging. I've made homemade webcam. It's weird to think I've been doing this since 2003. This technology's been around, where you literally take a $20 Walmart blue light special webcam that you get on discount, and you remove the front lens from it, and then you remove the IR filter because you want that IR channel on there. It's usually a little meniscus that's on the chip. Then you put a copper piece of plumbing on the front of the webcam, and then you hook it up to the telescope. And then you're actually using, I used to use a program called K3CCD Tools and Registax, but I think there's newer ones like AutoStacker that people are using now. What you're doing is what's called lucky imaging. You're taking a video of the planet, which will look like a little shimmery blob. Then you're running it through an algorithm, which finds in those frames, you're shooting 60, 80, 100 frames a second. There's little bits of good seeing as the atmosphere is stabilizing. The logarithm is picking those out, and then you stack those frames together, and it cleans out the signal to noise ratio. And you can get pretty decent planetary images. Now I'm using, let's see here, I actually have it in hand. I have a ZWO ASI high-speed camera that looks something like this. This is actually meant to be, this is a couple $100, but this is actually meant to be a planetary imaging camera. So, but you can modify an off-the-shelf webcam, like I said, for $20. I have done that with many, many webcams. We used to do something called the Virtual Star Party on Google Plus with Universe Today. And I would do streaming of the moon and planets with just that modified $20 webcam. So it's me sitting in the backyard, broadcasting off the laptop to the Wi-Fi, and I'm taking the image from that on the laptop and just showing it's good enough to do bright targets, Jupiter, Saturn, bright double stars. The moon looks pretty cool, but we were live. Those videos are still up on YouTube way back when too, in the Google Plus days. So that was fun. We almost discovered a supernova. True story. You might have heard about this.
Really? No. Yes. No.
This is.
Okay, I put it in the wrong place. I was just going to tell you about the supernova story. Oh, actually, I guess it's he elaborates in the next segment. Michelle Joy, thanks so much for joining us. And I think there's only 2 stations now, the International Space Station and the Chinese just launched something. Everything else has come back down to Earth, right? Mir has come back down, and Skylab. So thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate that. And just so you know, this is taped. That's why we haven't been able to talk to you directly about what you said before. Yeah, go ahead.
And David said that when we send him the questions, he will respond to the questions in the chat here.
Right, yeah, and you'll hear that at the end because we do have, I guess we're in our final segment now, and we just had to split it because of the 10-minute limitation. Yeah,
and he was talking about the fungus growing, or the
black
growing
mold,
in ISS. Well, that was one of the biggest complaints about Skylab also.
Oh, no kidding. I didn't know that. Well, that wasn't up there for 20 years, was it?
No, but it was a smaller enclosed space. They didn't have as good of scrubbers,
Got it.
And it was just someone said that you could scrape the walls.
Far out, man.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going into this final segment of the taped conversation I had with Dave Dickinson earlier this month. And listen, so hear the rest of the supernova story. And there is a message in there. Keep your eyes open for unusual things as you observe. And here we go for the last part. And we'll be back in just a few minutes.
This is Universe Today, like the myths and lore of Universe Today from way back when. This was early 2014, like the beginning of the year. And I was streaming the moon and Jupiter. So I wasn't doing deep sky. There was another observer who was doing, I think it was M81. And we didn't know it at the time, but when we were live streaming it, there was a supernova that had yet to be detected. It came on the news the next morning. We had it live. This is still up on YouTube. We had it live on the broadcast that night.
Wow.
And, I still kick myself because I was tinkering with my gear, aligning. I've looked at M81 enough, I might have been able to notice, hey, there's a bright star I've never seen there before. Let's look at the Wikipedia image and start comparing it. We could have discovered a supernova live on the show. The potential was there because we all heard about it in the news the next day. And then Fraser emailed me and he's like, weren't we looking at M81 last night? It's like, yeah, we were, weren't we? And it's like, so we went back through the footage and it's like, it was totally there. We could have totally discovered a supernova.
Wow.
The lesson being there is when you're observing, you never know. Keep your eye out for the unusual because, you might be looking at a galaxy tonight and you might be the first one to see a supernova. Or say, remember Hale-Bopp back in the 90s?
Yep.
Alan Hale and Thomas Bopp discovered that. But I think it was Alan Hale. He happened to be looking at, I believe it was Messier 8 at the time. And he wasn't looking for comets. And he happened to say, hey, there's a little fuzzball there that I don't think he had the presence of mind to be like, there's not a fuzzball by that nebula there. So he started putting two and two together. You watch for a while, you see the little bit of movement because comets will move very slowly. And he put two and two together and he just happened to surreptitiously discover a comet. So, those things do happen where you happen to be. I had brought that up to Fraser before because I was like, we could see, say, an impact on Jupiter. Amateurs have seen those sorts of things. We could be live streaming where there just happens to be a little flash. There was a total lunar eclipse a few years ago, 2018, that suddenly a lot of amateurs started saying they saw a flash on the moon. That was a meteoroid impact. So we all scrambled to go back through our videos and footage to see, but they, in fact, those keep your eye out for the out of the ordinary because sometimes those kind of things just pop up. Then you might be the first one to see it.
And with the equipment getting better, and of course, a lot of comets have been found on the SOHO camera. That's basically they just search through the images and try and follow, like you said.
That's very dedicated amateur sleuths that do that too. They're looking for SOHO wasn't meant to find sun-grazing comets, but it sees a lot of them. So SOHO is really wonderful. That's been up there over 20 years too. But so it's pretty incredible. I wrote about that and I didn't realize it's one of the things I like writing about things. You start researching. It's like, I never knew that. SOHO, before SOHO was launched in the 90s, less than half a dozen sun-grazing comets were known of. Now, SOHO's discovered, I think, over 4,000.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's like, but prior to that, they knew they probably existed. There had been an example of a few classic ones, like I think it was Ikea Siki in the 60s was a sun-grazer, but they had never looked that close into the sun. So prior to SOHO, they had only seen very, very few. Like I said, I believe it was less than half a dozen sun-grazing comets ever. So,
well, I'm just thinking about like even the equipment, the optics. Like I wanted a spotting scope, and the first time I looked at it, I was like amazed at how good the optics were because it was a more modern, piece of equipment than anything I'd had. Everything I'd used. Yeah. So it was like, holy mackerel, it was beautiful. For such a small and very inexpensive piece of equipment, the service is incredible to me. And it sets up like that. I got a line of people that can look at all kinds of different things. The moon, it feels like within touching distance. It's so cool.
This one here is just a 5-inch Maksudov. It's an Orion telescope. And I just have it on a very sturdy. I always advise people when you're getting a telescope, the mount is going to be half of your happiness or grief either way, because if you get a wobbly mount that's hard to aim, it's going to be really frustrating. So this is many nights on cloudy nights and forums and talking to other amateurs. What is the most sturdy travel mount you can get? And this Explore Scientific one is what I came out with. So it is a very rock solid mount. But you really don't need, you see the 18-inch scopes and the gigantic, enormous scopes, but really the sweet spot is between a 6, maybe a 5-inch like this and a 10-inch. After that, your light gathering is maybe 10% more to go to 12 inch, 5% more to go to 14, you know, so it's, you really, it's enough to, this is almost comparable to an 8-inch I used to have, and it's a 5-inch, so it's much smaller and more portable.
Well, you know, we have a professor here at Moorpark College. His name is Hal Jandorf, and his idea is the best telescope for you is the one you use.
Yes, that's a good axiom too. It's the one that you're going to take out and use the most. That little EV scope I had from Unistellar it impressed me. This was controlled by a smartphone, and
wow.
it had an electronic eyepiece on it, but it projected what it was seeing. They're not cheap; they're about $3,000. But I had one for review, and you know, I was deep sky imaging from downtown Norfolk, something I don't usually do, because this had what it's doing is it runs off GPS, so you're simply dialing in and aiming. So it kind of takes me out of the loop as far as having to aim it and find the object, which, you know, I can do. But it stacks up. It does that image stacking of deep sky images in real time. So I was able to. I happened to have it when Comet Neowise came by last year. So I was able to observe and image that with that. And I was like, this is actually a neat little platform. I could see the utility of it. You know, some amateurs are looking at it and they'll say, well, $3,000, I could get a new DSLR and I could get a Dobsonian, 12-inch Dobsonian and all this other gear. And I'm like, yeah, but you have the knowledge of you have to go through the learning curve of how do you assemble that? How do you image? How do you get everything to point? This is something that I had my neighbor as a test. He's very tech savvy, but he knows nothing about astronomy. I turned him loose with that. And he's like, I can bond the app to my phone and I can start deep sky imaging tonight. So it puts you through, you go through that learning curve into the biggest learning curve in astrophotography is from, it's easy to shoot the moon and do, you know, the sun with the solar filter and bright objects and planets. The biggest learning curve is start going toward faint targets, because then you're doing tracking, image stacking, cleaning up, and the whole workflow process after that. This first book, I tried to get the user up to about that beginning, because astrophotography, again, could be a whole book. So, and I tried to get them up to that. I'm doing bright targets in the moon and those kind of things up to the beginning of deep sky astrophotography, kind of get them over that learning curve. And you know, if you want to go into it deeper, you can certainly. But that was, again, I had to keep it down to a chapter. And that's already kind of getting dated after a couple of years because astrophotography has changed that quick. But
that's amazing. It sounds like an incredible book, incredibly useful book still, even now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A lot of the websites, like I said, you mentioned Cal Sky, that's mentioned in there. That's not around anymore. That kind of stuff changes the fastest, you know. When you're trying to say, here's all the resources and things to check, that's all going to alter and change.
So are you going to like do a revised edition ever? Or
I would like to, because one chapter in there, we also cover all the events up to 2024. So it's by 2024, that chapter is going to be obsolete. It started in 2019 because the book came out in 2018. So the reason I did an odd number of years, I asked the publisher, it's like, there's a big eclipse in 2024. So if we get it all the way out there, it'll be good till that eclipse. Yeah. So they agreed to the big April 8th total solar eclipse there in 2024. That made the book. So I wanted it to at least make that. But after that, I would like to revise some things in the book if they want to. It all depends if the publisher wants to do a second edition or not.
Okay, got it. All right. Well, you know, this has been an incredible experience to talk with you and learn all the things that you've been involved with. I mean, I would love to do more. And, you know, if you don't mind fielding some questions at some point, I think once we're published, and at that point, you know, it's on Facebook and so forth, we can just do comments to reply to people. So
that's true. Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Yeah, and that's only there's like comet observing, and there's a lot of other things. It's like it can definitely fill up an hour.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you know, we can wrap here, no problem, and I will be editing that kind of thing. So
okay.
Thank you so much, Dave. Let me go ahead and stop it. And
hello.
Well, there we are. That was my conversation with Dave Dickinson. On May the 7th, we got some comments while that was running. Oh, thanks, Michelle Joy. I really appreciate that. And you wanted to know about SOHO. That is the Solar Observatory Helios.
Yeah. And
did you find it?
Yeah. Oh, and you were asking about contact info. So there's one of the ways of getting a hold of David Dickinson.
Yeah, he's actually a pretty well-known author. Like I said, I knew him before that. So what else is in there? We needed to do SOHO, right?
SOHO. I posted what it is. Solar and Heliospheric Observatory. What it is it's essentially a space vehicle that's sitting between us and the sun.
Right.
It's at the L1 point, I believe, for us and the sun, which means that it's a fairly stable spot. Orbitally between us and the sun, and so it stays there. And it's been pointed at the sun for about 20 years. Yeah, about 20 years.
And what I like to think of it too is like having a total solar eclipse all the time. It blocks the actual sun, and so you can see all the things that are happening around it. We studied the chromosphere, and of course, like you heard, people have been discovering comets because of, they can't see the brightness of the sun anymore because it is blocked by this particular observatory. So what did Cliff have?
Oh, just Tex is one of his club members.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, hi. Welcome. Yeah. All right, so if you do have questions for Dave, we are going to help you get answers basically in the comments of YouTube and in the Facebook groups, that kind of thing. But yeah, we'll try and help you out if you have questions, more questions for Dave. He is on Facebook as well. So yeah, we'll see what happens after the show and into the next few days.
Yeah, and why don't you look at comments while I do this?
Yeah.
Sure. So what you can see in the night sky this week, beginning May 28th through June 4th. The moon is 17 days old, and it's the last quarter moon is on June 2nd. And we're just wondering, on May 26th, did anyone there actually see the lunar eclipse? For us, it was like 4 something in the morning, and the night before,
cloudy.
Well, that's her excuse. Mine was, I was thinking, do I want to set an alarm for 3:45? And at that point, kind of, no.
And it was only really. 14 minutes of totality for our area anyway. The eclipse was basically over the Pacific Ocean. So Cliff got it right. Did you see that, Cliff? And Dave said he had a pretty good spot too. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
And oh yeah, more.
Yes, there's more.
I was reading Roger's comment. Okay, on May 29th, Mercury and Venus are in conjunction. Look low in the west, right around sunset. Both Mercury and Venus are easily seen. Pluto and the Moon are in conjunction on May 29th, also on May 29th. Look for the waning gibbous moon a few hours after sunset. The moon is easily seen. Pluto will require a lot of optical aid.
Yes.
Like Mount Wilson. May 30th, Saturn and the moon are in conjunction. Look for an even smaller waning moon later in the night. Both Saturn and the moon are easily seen, although you want at least a good pair of binoculars to see the rings. June 1st, Jupiter and the moon are in conjunction. The moon is almost at last quarter and rises around midnight. Both Jupiter and the moon are easily seen. And of course, if you want to see the moons of Jupiter, get yourself a good pair of binoculars or a small telescope.
Yeah.
Or a big telescope, and you can actually see some bands on Jupiter.
Yeah, very cool though.
Yeah.
Even with the small scope.
Yes. June 2nd, last quarter moon. And also on June 2nd, Neptune and the moon are in conjunction. Look for this waning moon from midnight to sunrise. And the moon is easily seen. Neptune will require optical aid.
Boy, last week, really slow. There was just one thing, the eclipse. This week, wow, very busy. So lots to look for. And, I think I'll copy that list and also add it into the comments so you can see it. It's a little bit easier to, pick them out from a whole big list instead of a video.
Oh, hi, Christina.
Yeah, hi, Christina.
And Chef Cliff, that's great that you managed to get a bunch of people together to see it. That's
fun.
That's cool. Yeah, we had no chance of that at 4 something a.m. in the morning.
All right, so that pretty much does it for the show. We will field some questions still. If you are someone has done something interesting involving space exploration, science, astronomy like that, we would love to share our live. Join us again next Friday, June the 4th, and we're going to continue our Citizen Science series with Tag Along with Adler, helping the Adler Planetarium tag their collections. Jeff is going to take the lead on that. I'm going to show some more comments. Thanks so much, Cliff. We really enjoyed it too. And thank you, Michelle Joy. I'm so glad you could make it. I think that's it for us. So we're going to sign off unless you got something else.
Nope.
All right.
I'll wait until we're signing off to say something bizarre and make you laugh. How's that?
All right. Have a great week, people. We'll see you next time.